an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. The lamplight catches ivory silk as Eliza Hartnell descends the great staircase of Halewyn House, her hand trembling against the carved banister. Below, Duke Adrian Halewyn stands frozen, his face draining of all color, as recognition strikes him like a physical blow. The gown she wears, pulled hastily from storage by a flustered housekeeper, belonged to his late wife. And now this quiet companion, daughter of a disgraced steward, moves through the golden light like a ghost made flesh. The gathered guests fall silent, their eyes sharp with judgment and speculation. Eliza sees the horror in his face and understands too late what she has done. But she cannot retreat, cannot flee, so she continues downward with forced grace, while the weight of scandal settles over her shoulders like winter frost. In that suspended moment, neither of them can know that this mistake will unravel a decade of carefully preserved lies and lead them both toward a truth that will cost everything. The house stood against the moorland like a promise kept. Halewyn House had weathered 2 centuries of English winters, its gray stone walls holding fast against wind and rain and the slow erosion of time. In the spring of 1824, it remained what it had always been, a place of order, restraint, and careful memory. Miss Eliza Hartnell moved through its corridors like a shadow cast by candlelight. She was 27 years old, though the severity of her dress and the quietness of her manner made her seem older. Her duties as companion to the Duke's elderly aunt required neither beauty nor charm, only patience and an ability to fade into the background when necessary. These were skills she had cultivated with the dedication others might apply to music or needlework. She had learned them young, in the months after her father's fall from grace. Thomas Hartnell had been chief steward of Halewyn House for 15 years. He had managed the estate with meticulous care, earning the trust of the old Duke and the respect of every tenant and servant. Eliza remembered those years as golden, a childhood spent in the comfortable rooms above the estate office, her father's steady presence a guarantee of security and belonging. Then came the dismissal, swift, quiet, devastating. The details were never spoken aloud in her presence. She knew only that her father had been accused of conduct unbecoming his position, of some breach of trust that could not be overlooked. He was given a month's wages and a letter of reference so carefully worded as to be worthless. They left Halewyn House on a gray November morning, her father's face carved from stone, his silence more terrible than any explanation. He found work as a clerk in a shipping office in Plymouth. The wages were poor, the lodgings worse. He died 18 months later of a fever that might not have taken him had he been stronger, had the damp rooms and insufficient food not already weakened him beyond recovery. Eliza was 19 when she buried him. She had no family, no prospects, and a surname that carried the faint stain of disgrace. It was the Dowager Duchess, the current Duke's aunt, who offered her salvation. Lady Catherine Halewyn was a woman of rigid propriety and surprising kindness. She had known Eliza as a child, remembered her as well-mannered and capable. When her previous companion married, Lady Catherine wrote to Eliza with an offer of employment. Eliza accepted. She had little choice. Returning to Halewyn House required a particular kind of courage. She had to walk past the rooms where she had once belonged. To serve in the house, her father had managed to endure the whispers of servants who remembered his disgrace. But she bore it with the same quiet dignity her father had shown in those final months. She did not defend him. She did not speak of the past. She simply performed her duties with competence and grace, asking nothing beyond her wages and a room of her own. 8 years had passed since her return. In that time, she had become part of the house's architecture, necessary, unnoticed, as constant as the portraits on the walls. The late Duchess'S portrait hung in the main hall, opposite the great staircase. Eliza passed it twice daily and had long since stopped seeing it. But she knew what it showed. A young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, painted in her wedding gown, her expression serene with the confidence of a woman who had never known doubt or fear. She had died 5 years ago in childbirth. The child had not survived either. The Duke had not remarried. He was 40 now, still handsome in the austere manner of men who carry grief like a coat, they cannot remove. He was civil to Eliza on the rare occasions their paths crossed, but distant. She was grateful for the distance. It allowed her to remain invisible, which was the only safety she had ever known. The house itself seemed to hold its breath around him. Servants spoke in lowered voices. Rooms were maintained exactly as the Duchess had left them. Even the gardens were tended according to her preferences. Roses planted where she had requested them. Paths swept clean each morning as they had been in her lifetime. It was a house that revered memory. A house where the past was more vivid than the present. Eliza understood this instinctively. She too carried the past like a wound that had healed over, but never truly closed. She tended her father's memory in private, speaking his name to no one, keeping the few letters he had written to her tucked beneath her mattress, like relics of a saint. She had learned not to hope for vindication. The world did not correct its mistakes for people like her. The best she could do was endure with dignity, to live quietly and without complaint, to earn her bread and expect nothing more. Spring came late that year. The moors remained brown and windswept well into April, the gardens slow to wake. But by early May, the first roses began to bloom, and Lady Catherine declared that it was time to honor tradition. The late Duchess's birthday fell on the 15th of May. Each year, the Duke hosted a small gathering to mark the occasion, an intimate dinner for close family, and a few carefully chosen guests. It was not a celebration, precisely, but a ritual of remembrance, a way of keeping her present in a house that refused to let her go. Eliza was not expected to attend. Her place was upstairs, in the suite of rooms where Lady Catherine spent her evenings. But this year, the Dowager insisted otherwise. "I shall need you, my dear," Lady Catherine said, her voice gentle but firm. "There will be more guests than usual, and I find myself easily tired these days. You must be nearby, in case I require assistance." Eliza's stomach tightened with unease. "Of course, my lady, but surely I need not be visible. I can wait in the adjoining room." "Nonsense. You will attend as my companion. It is perfectly proper." Lady Catherine patted her hand with affection. "You have been with me 8 years, Eliza. It is time the household acknowledged you as more than a servant." Eliza wanted to argue, but she knew better. Lady Catherine's kindness was absolute, but so was her authority. So Eliza prepared herself for an evening of careful invisibility, among people who would prefer not to see her at all. The day of the gathering arrived with unsettling brightness. Sunlight poured through the windows of Halewyn House, illuminating dust motes and exposing the shabbiness of curtains that had not been replaced in a decade. The servants moved with increased urgency, polishing silver and arranging flowers, and preparing the dining room for guests who would arrive at 7. Eliza spent the afternoon with Lady Catherine, reading aloud from a volume of sermons and helping the older woman dress for the evening. By 6 o'clock, Lady Catherine was ready, resplendent in black silk with jet beading, her white hair arranged in elegant curls. Eliza returned to her own small room to prepare herself. Her wardrobe was limited. She owned 3-day dresses, all in shades of gray or brown, and one evening gown of dark blue wool that she had worn to church on Christmas. It was plain but respectable, suitable for a woman of her position. She laid it out on the bed and turned to wash her face and hands. That was when disaster struck. The water jug, placed too near the edge of the washstand, tipped as she reached for it. Water cascaded across the floor, splashing her skirts and soaking the hem of the blue gown. She grabbed for the jug, overcorrected, and knocked over the inkwell she had been using earlier to write a letter. Black ink spread across the bodice of the gown like a stain of guilt. Eliza stared at the ruined dress, her heart pounding. There was no time to clean it, no way to make it presentable, and she had nothing else suitable for an evening gathering. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Hartnell." It was Mrs. Godfrey, the housekeeper, her voice tight with urgency. "Lady Catherine is asking for you. The guests are beginning to arrive." Eliza opened the door, her face pale. "Mrs. Godfrey, I've had an accident. My gown is ruined. I cannot possibly." The housekeeper's eyes widened as she took in the ink-stained dress. For a moment, she looked as stricken as Eliza felt. Then her expression hardened with determination. "There's no time for this," she said briskly. "Come with me." She led Eliza down the servants' corridor to a storage room. "Eliza, had never entered. It was filled with trunks and hat boxes, garments wrapped in muslin, and smelling faintly of lavender. Mrs. Godfrey moved with the efficiency of long practice, opening a particular trunk and pulling out a gown wrapped in tissue paper. "This will do," she said, shaking it out. Eliza's breath caught. It was beautiful. Ivory silk with a high waist and long, graceful sleeves. The neckline was modest, the cut simple, but the fabric itself was exquisite, shimmering faintly in the lamplight, draping like water. "Mrs. Godfrey, I cannot possibly wear something so fine. Whose is it? Should we not ask permission?" "There's no time to ask anyone anything," the housekeeper said, thrusting the gown into Eliza's hands. "It's been in storage for years. No one will notice. Now hurry, before Lady Catherine sends someone else looking for you." Eliza hesitated, but the housekeeper was already bustling out of the room, muttering about the wine not being properly chilled. There was no choice. Eliza returned to her room and dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she fastened the tiny buttons. The gown fit perfectly, too perfectly. She stared at herself in the small mirror above her washstand. The ivory silk transformed her. It brought out the color in her cheeks, the dark gold of her hair. It made her look like someone she was not, someone who belonged in the grand rooms downstairs, someone who might be seen and admired rather than overlooked. The thought filled her with dread, but there was no time to change, no alternative. She pinned her hair into a simple knot, took a steadying breath, and left her room. The corridor outside was empty. She could hear the murmur of voices from below, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. She walked toward the main staircase, her heart beating too fast. The great staircase of Halewyn House was a masterpiece of Georgian design. It curved gracefully from the entrance hall to the upper gallery, its banister carved from dark oak, its steps worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced ancestors in ruffs and wigs, their painted eyes watching every descent. Eliza had climbed these stairs 1,000 times, but she had never descended them dressed like this, had never walked into the light and attention of the household's formal spaces. She paused at the top, gathering her courage. Below, the entrance hall glowed with lamplight. Guests were arriving, their voices bright with polite conversation. Servants moved among them with trays of wine. Lady Catherine stood near the drawing-room door, greeting arrivals with gracious formality. And at the base of the stairs, speaking with an elderly gentleman in clerical dress, stood the Duke of Halewyn. Eliza began her descent. She kept her eyes lowered, her hand light on the banister. She moved carefully, conscious of the unfamiliar weight of the silk, the way it whispered against the stairs. She was halfway down when she felt the change in the room, a subtle shift in attention, a ripple of awareness. She looked up. The Duke was staring at her. His face had gone utterly white. His hand, which had been raised in some gesture of conversation, hung frozen in the air. His lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. Eliza's stomach dropped. Understanding came like cold water closing over her head. The gown. This had been her gown. The Duchess'S. She wanted to turn and flee, to disappear back up the stairs and tear off the silk, and hide in her room until everyone forgot she existed. But she could not. The guests were watching now, their conversations faltering as they followed the Duke's gaze. To retreat would only make it worse. So she continued down, step by careful step, her hand trembling against the banister. The Duke did not move. He stood at the base of the stairs like a man turned to stone, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin burn. She reached the bottom. The entrance hall felt impossibly large, the distance between them vast and unbridgeable. She could not look at him. She turned toward Lady Catherine, intending to slip quietly to her side. "Eliza." The Duke's voice was barely more than a whisper. She stopped. She had no choice. Slowly, she turned to face him. His eyes were dark with something she could not name. Shock, certainly, but beneath it something deeper and more complicated. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. He opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched unbearably. Lady Catherine appeared at Eliza's side, her hand closing gently around Eliza's arm. "Come, my dear," she said, her voice carefully bright. "Let us greet our guests." She drew Eliza away, into the safety of the drawing room, leaving the Duke standing alone at the base of the stairs. But Eliza could feel his gaze following her, like a weight she could not set down. The dinner was an ordeal of exquisite politeness. Eliza sat at the far end of the table, beside Lady Catherine and across from a vicar's wife, who spoke exclusively about her daughter's recent engagement. She ate little, though the food was excellent. She spoke when spoken to, smiled when appropriate, and kept her eyes carefully away from the head of the table, where the Duke presided over the gathering with his usual grave courtesy. But she could feel the whispers. They moved through the room like smoke, invisible but unmistakable. The guests were too well-bred to stare openly or speak their thoughts aloud, but their glances were sharp, their silences pointed. A young woman in a gown that had belonged to the late Duchess, a companion of no particular family, the daughter of a disgraced steward. The implications required no words. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, while the gentlemen remained at table. Eliza hoped to escape upstairs, but Lady Catherine kept her close, introducing her to guests with determined kindness. Eliza endured it with the same patience she had learned over 8 years of invisibility. But she heard the whispers, fragments of conversation, half-finished sentences that cut more deeply than open accusations. Poor taste, surely. One wonders if it was deliberate. Ambition takes many forms, does it not? Eliza's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression serene. She had survived worse than this. She would survive this too. When the gentlemen rejoined them, the Duke did not approach her. He moved through the room with careful distance, speaking to each guest in turn, playing the role of gracious host with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. But once, across the crowded drawing room, their eyes met. His expression was unreadable, but he did not look away, and neither did she. And in that suspended moment Eliza felt something shift between them. Some acknowledgement of the impossibility of the situation, the cruelty of coincidence, the weight of memory made flesh. Then Lady Catherine touched her arm, asking for her shawl, and the moment broke. The guests began to depart near midnight. Eliza helped Lady Catherine upstairs, grateful for the excuse to leave. As she settled the older woman into bed, Lady Catherine took her hand. "I am sorry, my dear," she said quietly. "I should not have insisted you attend. I did not think," she paused, her lined face troubled. "The gown was a mistake. Mrs. Godfrey should have known better." "It was not her fault," Eliza said. "There was no time. She meant well." Lady Catherine squeezed her hand. "You conducted yourself with grace. I was proud of you." Eliza managed a smile, though her throat was tight. "Thank you, my lady. Sleep well." She returned to her own room, closed the door, and leaned against it. Her hands were shaking. She unfastened the gown with fumbling fingers, letting the ivory silk pool at her feet. In the dim light of her single candle, it looked like a ghost of itself. She folded it carefully, wrapped it in the tissue paper Mrs. Godfrey had discarded, and placed it in the bottom of her wardrobe. Then she sat on the edge of her narrow bed and allowed herself, for the first time in 8 years, to weep. The days that followed were marked by a coldness more painful than open hostility. The guests who had attended the dinner said nothing directly, but their silence was eloquent. Invitations that might have been extended to Lady Catherine were quietly withdrawn. Calls that should have been returned were delayed. The social fabric of the county, usually so carefully maintained, developed small tears that everyone pretended not to notice. Eliza understood. She had become a problem, an embarrassment, a reminder of something the household wished to forget. The Duke avoided her entirely. When their paths crossed in the corridor, he turned away. When she entered a room where he stood, he found reason to leave. His absence was more damning than any accusation. Lady Catherine grew anxious. She did not say so directly, but Eliza saw it in the way she watched her, in the careful neutrality of her tone, when she suggested that Eliza might prefer to take her meals in her room, rather than in the servants' hall. "Only if it would be more comfortable for you, my dear," she said gently. "I know how trying the past week has been." Eliza understood what was being offered, a retreat, a way to make herself even smaller, even less visible, until the household forgot she existed. She considered it. She had nowhere else to go, no references that would carry weight beyond Halewyn House. If she left, she would be destitute. If she stayed and continued to be a source of discomfort, she might be dismissed. But something in her resisted. Some stubborn core of pride that her father had left her, perhaps, or simply exhaustion with the endless work of making herself small. She thanked Lady Catherine politely and continued to take her meals in the servants' hall. The servants were kinder than the gentry. They did not whisper. They simply treated her as they always had, with the distant courtesy afforded to someone who occupied the uncertain space between servant and family. But even their kindness felt like pity, and pity was harder to bear than contempt. A week after the disastrous dinner, Lady Catherine hosted an afternoon tea for several ladies of the county. It was a small gathering, carefully chosen, women whose loyalty to the family was beyond question, whose discretion could be trusted. Eliza was expected to attend. She poured tea, passed sandwiches, and listened to conversations about embroidery and charity work, and the scandalous cost of good lace. Then Mrs. Ashford, the wife of a local magistrate, set down her teacup with a delicate click. "I must say, Lady Catherine," she began, her tone light and conversational, "it is generous of you to maintain such a large household. So many young women these days seek positions beyond their natural station. It requires great discernment to know where true loyalty lies." The room went very still. Lady Catherine's expression did not change, but her hand tightened on her own teacup. "I have always valued loyalty, Mrs. Ashford, and competence. Miss Hartnell has served me faithfully for 8 years. "Oh, I do not doubt her competence," Mrs. Ashford said smoothly. "But one must be careful, must one not, of those who wear borrowed glory. It can give quite the wrong impression." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her cheeks burned. Her hands, holding the teapot, trembled slightly. Lady Catherine drew breath to respond, but Eliza spoke first. "You are quite right, Mrs. Ashford." Her voice was calm, steady, without heat. "Borrowed glory is a dangerous thing. It can deceive both the wearer and the observer." Mrs. Ashford's eyebrows rose. "Indeed." Eliza set down the teapot and met the older woman's gaze directly. The late Duchess was a woman of remarkable character. I never had the privilege of knowing her, but every person in this household speaks of her kindness, her generosity of spirit, her care for those in her charge. She was beloved not because of her position, but because of who she was. That is true glory. That is what should be remembered. She paused, her throat tight. I would never presume to claim any part of that, but I will defend her memory against those who would reduce it to a matter of gowns and appearances. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Ashford's face had gone rigid. The other ladies stared at their teacups. Lady Catherine's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or pride, or both. And in the doorway, unnoticed until now, stood the Duke of Halewyn. His face was very pale. His eyes were fixed on Eliza with an expression she could not read. How long he had been standing there, she did not know. He did not speak. After a long moment, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Eliza's hands were shaking. She folded them in her lap and kept her eyes lowered while the conversation resumed around her, brittle and forced. But she had spoken. She had not begged for understanding or performed humility. She had simply told the truth. It was a small act of courage, but it was hers. The Duke could not sleep. He stood at the window of his study, watching the moon rise over the moors. The house was silent around him. The servants long since retired. But his mind would not quiet. Eliza's words echoed in his memory. She was beloved not because of her position, but because of who she was. He had spent 5 years preserving his late wife's memory. He had kept her rooms unchanged, her portrait prominently displayed, her birthday honored with ritual solemnity. He had believed this was love. This was fidelity. But listening to Eliza speak, hearing her defend a woman she had never met with more genuine feeling than he had shown in years, he realized with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that he had been preserving not his wife's memory, but his own grief. He had turned Catherine into a saint, untouchable and perfect. He had made her memory a wall between himself and the world, and he had never questioned the version of the past he had inherited. The thought unsettled him. He turned away from the window and sat at his desk, lighting a candle. The estate ledgers were kept in the adjoining office. But his father's personal papers were here, in the locked drawer he had not opened since the old Duke's death. He found the key and unlocked the drawer. Inside were letters, legal documents, and several leather-bound journals. He pulled out the one marked with the year of Thomas Hartnell's dismissal and began to read. His father's handwriting was precise, unemotional. The entries were brief, records of meetings, decisions made, estate business conducted. But in October of that year, there was a longer entry. Dismissed T. Hartnell today. Regrettable but necessary. He refused to sign the statement regarding C's whereabouts on the evening of the 14th. His scruples, though admirable in the abstract, cannot be permitted to jeopardize the family's reputation. Have provided a reference letter, carefully worded to avoid falsehood, while ensuring he will find no comparable position. He leaves at month's end. The Duke read the entry 3 times. His hands were cold. C. His cousin, Charles. The Duchess's younger brother, reckless and charming and prone to scandal. He remembered, vaguely, some trouble that year. Charles had been involved with a married woman, or perhaps it was gambling debts. The details were hazy, but the family had managed it quietly, as they always did. The scandal had been contained. But at what cost? The Duke rose and went to the estate office. The old ledgers were kept on high shelves, organized by year. He found the one he needed and carried it back to his study. The entries were meticulous. Thomas Hartnell had been a careful steward. Every expense was recorded, every decision justified. There was no hint of dishonesty or incompetence. Only in the margin of one page, a single note in his father's hand. Hartnell refuses cooperation. Dismissal required. The Duke sat back in his chair, the ledger open before him. Thomas Hartnell had been dismissed not for dishonesty, but for honesty, for refusing to lie. And his daughter had lived under the shadow of that disgrace for more than a decade. The realization settled over him like a weight. He had been so careful to honor his wife's memory, but he had never thought to question the injustice his family had done to a man who had served them faithfully. He had accepted the story he was told, never looking deeper, never asking whether the past his family preserved so carefully was built on truth or convenience. He thought of Eliza on the staircase, pale and dignified in ivory silk. He thought of her voice in the drawing room, defending his wife's memory with more grace than he had shown in years. She had every reason to be bitter, to resent this house and everyone in it. But instead, she had chosen dignity, integrity, the qualities her father had been punished for. The Duke closed the ledger and sat in the darkness, the candle burning low. He knew what he had to do, but the cost would be real. Morning came with rain. The moors disappeared into mist, and the house settled into the gray quiet of a day, turned inward. The Duke sent for his aunt before breakfast. Lady Catherine arrived in the small drawing room, looking anxious. She had not seen her nephew seek her out, privately, in months. "Is something wrong, Adrian?" He gestured for her to sit. "I need to speak with you about Thomas Hartnell." Her face went still. "Why?" "Because I have been reading my father's papers, and I have learned something that troubles me greatly." He told her what he had found. He watched her face as understanding dawned, followed by dismay, and finally a kind of weary resignation. "I did not know the details," she said quietly, "but I suspected. Your father was a good man in many ways, Adrian, but he valued the family's reputation above almost everything else. If Thomas Hartnell would not cooperate..." She trailed off, her hands twisting in her lap. "He was dismissed for refusing to lie." "Yes, and we allowed his name to be stained. We allowed him to die in poverty and disgrace. We allowed his daughter to live under the weight of a dishonor he earned by being honest." Lady Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "What will you do?" "I will correct the record, publicly." She drew a sharp breath. "Adrian, you must consider carefully. If you acknowledge this, you will be admitting that your father, that this family, acted unjustly. There will be consequences. Some will see it as weakness, others as disloyalty to your father's memory. I know, you may lose allies, invitations, support. I know." She studied his face for a long moment. She nodded slowly. "You are right to do this, but it will cost you. Some things are worth the cost." He summoned the family solicitor that afternoon. Mr. Pemberton arrived with his usual efficiency, his leather case filled with documents, and his expression carefully neutral. The Duke explained what he had discovered and what he intended to do. Mr. Pemberton's face grew increasingly troubled. Your Grace, I must advise caution. To issue a public correction of this nature, to acknowledge that your father dismissed a steward unjustly, it will raise questions. It will invite scrutiny of other family decisions, and it will be seen by some as a repudiation of your father's judgment. It is a repudiation of an injustice. Yes, but prepare the statement, Mr. Pemberton. I want it clear and unambiguous. Thomas Hartnell was dismissed not for any failure of duty or breach of trust, but because he refused to provide false testimony to protect the family from minor scandal. His name is to be cleared, formally and publicly. The solicitor sighed. As you wish, Your Grace, but I must warn you, there will be repercussions. The repercussions began before the statement was even issued. Word spread quickly in the tight circles of the county gentry. The Duke's intentions became known through the quiet channels of servants' gossip and solicitors' clerks. By the end of the week, two families who had been allies for generations sent polite notes, withdrawing their support for a charitable venture the Duke had been organizing. A dinner invitation was rescinded. A business arrangement was quietly dissolved. The Duke bore it without flinching. The formal statement was issued on a Monday morning. It was read aloud in the parish church and posted in the village square. It was brief, factual, and devastating in its simplicity. It has come to my attention that Thomas Hartnell, who served as steward of this estate from 1802 to 1817, was dismissed not for any failure of duty, but for refusing to provide false testimony at the request of my late father. This was an injustice. Mr. Hartnell served this family with integrity and honor. His name is hereby cleared of any stain, and his service is acknowledged with gratitude and respect. The response was immediate. Some praised the Duke's courage. Others condemned his disloyalty to his father's memory. The vicar called it an act of Christian conscience. Mrs. Ashford called it a scandal. The household itself seemed to exhale. Servants who had known Thomas Hartnell wept. Mrs. Godfrey sought out the Duke privately to thank him, her voice shaking with emotion. And Eliza learned of it not from the Duke, but from a chambermaid who had heard it read in church. She stood in Lady Catherine's sitting room, a book forgotten in her hands, as the girl repeated the words of the statement with breathless excitement. They read it out, miss, right there in front of everyone, and the vicar said it was a brave thing to admit a wrong done so long ago. And your father's name is cleared, miss. Everyone knows now that he did nothing wrong. Eliza could not speak. Her throat had closed. Her eyes burned. The chambermaid, realizing she had overstepped, curtsied quickly and fled. Eliza sank into a chair, the book sliding from her hands. Her father's name was cleared. After 10 years of silence and shadow, the truth had been spoken, publicly, irrevocably. She had not asked for this, had not expected it, had long since resigned herself to carrying the weight of his disgrace as the price of survival. But the Duke had done it anyway. At what cost, she did not yet know. But she understood that it had not been done lightly. She rose and left the sitting room, moving through the corridors with purpose. She did not know what she would say. She knew only that she had to find him. She found him in his study, standing at the window, his back to the door. She knocked softly. Your Grace. He turned. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But when he saw her, something in his expression shifted, some guardedness falling away. Miss Hartnell. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Propriety be damned. This moment required privacy. I have just learned what you have done, she said quietly. He said nothing. He simply watched her, waiting. I do not know how to thank you. No thanks are necessary. The truth was owed, at considerable cost to yourself. He shrugged slightly. Some things are worth the cost. Her eyes filled. She had not wept in front of another person since her father's death, but she could not stop the tears now. You did not have to do this. You owed me nothing. My father was gone long before you became Duke, but the injustice was done in my family's name, and you have borne the weight of it for years. He took a step toward her, his voice low and fierce. You should never have had to carry that burden, and I should have questioned it long ago. She shook her head, unable to speak. I was wrong, he said, about many things. I have spent 5 years preserving memory at the expense of truth. I have protected the past so carefully that I stopped seeing the present. I stopped seeing people who were right in front of me, who deserved to be seen. His eyes held hers. I stopped seeing you. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning she was afraid to name. You saw me on the staircase, she whispered. Yes. His voice was rough. I saw you, and I could not breathe. Silence filled the space between them. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the floor. I thought you were angry, Eliza said. I thought I had committed some terrible offense. No, he closed the distance between them, stopping just beyond reach. I was not angry. I was undone. Because for the first time in 5 years, I saw someone other than a ghost. I saw a living woman, and she was— He stopped, his jaw tightening. She was what? Eliza's voice was barely audible. Beautiful, he said simply, and I had no right to think so. Her breath caught. He looked away, his hands clenched at his sides. Forgive me. I should not have said that. Why not? The question came out stronger than she intended. Why should you not say what is true? His eyes snapped back to hers. Because you are under my roof, under my protection. Because I have power over your circumstances, and anything I say to you is shadowed by that imbalance. Because I have no right to burden you with feelings you did not ask for and may not welcome. And if I do welcome them— The words left her before she could stop them. He went very still. Eliza, do not tell me what I should or should not feel, she said, her voice shaking. I have spent 10 years being told where I belong, what I deserve, what I am permitted to want. I am tired of it. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. You have given me back my father's name, she said. You have given me back my own. That is more than anyone has ever done for me. And if you think I can stand here, not feel— She stopped, her courage faltering. Not feel what? His voice was low, urgent. She met his eyes. Gratitude, respect. Something more than either of those. The silence stretched. Then slowly, he extended his hand. She looked at it. Not a demand, an offering. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. A gesture of reverence, not possession. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or fear or both. I do not know what happens now, he said quietly. I do not know if this is wise or possible or right. But I know that I see you, and I will not stop seeing you. Eliza's throat was tight. That is enough. For now, that is enough. He released her hand slowly, as though reluctant to let go. You should return to my aunt. People will talk if you are found here. Let them talk. I am tired of hiding. A faint smile touched his lips. So am I. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your Grace, Adrian, thank you. For what? For being brave enough to tell the truth, even when it cost you. He inclined his head. I learned it from you. She left the study with her heart beating too fast, and her hands still warm from his touch. The household did not transform overnight, but it began to shift in small, unmistakable ways. Servants greeted Eliza by name. The housekeeper asked her opinion on household matters. Invitations that had been withdrawn were quietly reinstated. Not all of them, but enough to signal that the Duke's public correction had been accepted. If not universally approved, Eliza was no longer invisible. She was acknowledged, included, seen. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The Duke did not rush. He did not press his advantage or make demands, but he found reasons to seek her out. A question about his aunt's comfort, a request for her thoughts on a book, a chance meeting in the garden that felt less like chance with each repetition. They spoke of small things at first, the weather, the estate, the progress of the roses. But gradually, the conversations deepened. He told her about his late wife, not the saint he had made her into, but the real woman she had been. Kind, yes, but also anxious, eager to please, afraid of disappointing his family. She had died trying to give him an heir, and he had spent 5 years blaming himself for wanting what had killed her. Eliza listened without judgment. She told him about her father, not the disgraced steward of rumor, but the man who had taught her to read, who had valued honesty above safety, who had died quietly and without bitterness. They walked the estate grounds together, always within sight of the house, always proper. but there was an intimacy in their conversations that had nothing to do with physical proximity. One afternoon, they stood together in the library, looking at the portrait of the late Duchess that hung above the mantel. "She would have liked you," the Duke said quietly. Eliza glanced at him in surprise. "How can you know that?" "Because she valued honesty and courage, and you have both in abundance." Eliza studied the painted face, the gentle eyes, the serene expression. "I hope I would have liked her too. You defended her memory with more grace than I ever did. You honor her by living well, by choosing truth over comfort. That is the best memorial anyone could offer." He turned to look at her. "You have taught me that. I have taught you nothing. You chose this path yourself, but you showed me it was possible." He paused, his voice dropping. "Eliza, I need to ask you something." Her pulse quickened. "Yes? Will you stay? Not as my aunt's companion, not as a dependent of this house, but as yourself, as the woman He stopped, searching for words. "As the woman I have come to care for deeply." She felt the weight of the question, the impossibility of it, the risk. "I have no family," she said slowly. "No fortune, no position. If I stay, people will assume the worst. They will say I have trapped you, that I am ambitious, that I seek to replace. Let them say what they will. I am asking what you want." She looked at him. This man who had risked his reputation to clear her father's name, who had chosen truth over convenience, who had seen her when no one else had. "I want to stay," she whispered. His face transformed, relief and joy, and something deeper flooded his expression. "Then stay." He did not touch her, not yet, but the promise hung between them, as real as any vow. Spring gave way to summer. The roses bloomed in profusion, filling the gardens with color and scent. The moors turned green, and the house seemed to breathe more easily, as though some long-held tension had finally released. The Duke courted Eliza with the patience of a man who understood that trust was earned slowly. He invited her to walk with him, to ride with him, to sit beside him at dinner when there were no guests to judge. Lady Catherine watched with cautious approval. She said nothing directly, but her smiles were warm, her encouragement subtle and constant. The county gentry remained divided. Some accepted the Duke's choice with grace. Others withdrew their favor, scandalized by the idea of a Duke marrying a woman of no family or fortune. The Duke bore their judgment without flinching. He had learned that integrity mattered more than approval. One evening in late June, he found Eliza in the garden at dusk. She stood among the roses, her face turned toward the setting sun. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "I used to come here as a child," she said without turning, "before my father was dismissed. I thought it was the most beautiful place in the world. It still is." She turned to face him. "I never thought I would be happy here. I thought this house would always be a place of loss. And now it feels like home." He stepped closer. "Eliza, I have something to ask you." She smiled faintly. "You have already asked me to stay. I am asking for more than that." He took her hand. "I am asking you to marry me." Her breath caught. "Adrian, I know the risks. I know what people will say, but I do not care. I want a life built on truth, not convenience. I want a partner who sees me as I am, not as I am supposed to be. I want you." Tears filled her eyes. "I am not what people expect for you." "No, you are better." She laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. "You are certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything." She looked at him. This man who had given her back her name, her dignity, her future. This man who had chosen her when he could have chosen safety. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. For a long moment, they stood together in the fading light, the scent of roses surrounding them. When he finally released her, his eyes were bright. "There is one more thing." "What?" "The staircase. I want to walk down it with you, properly, in daylight, so that everyone sees." She understood. The place where fear had begun would become the place where courage was affirmed. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, at noon, when the light is strongest." The next day dawned clear and bright. Sunlight poured through the windows of Halewyn House, illuminating every corner, banishing every shadow. Eliza, dressed in a gown of pale green muslin, her own, purchased with her own wages, simple and lovely. She wore no jewels, no borrowed finery. She was simply herself. Lady Catherine met her at the top of the stairs, her eyes damp with emotion. "You look beautiful, my dear." "Thank you." Eliza's voice was steady, though her heart raced. Below, in the entrance hall, the household had gathered. Servants lined the walls. The housekeeper stood near the door, her face bright with approval. And at the base of the stairs, waiting, stood the Duke of Halewyn. He looked up as Eliza appeared, his face lit with such open joy that her breath caught. She began her descent. This time, there was no fear, no shame, no borrowed glory, just herself, and the man who loved her. She walked down the great staircase in full morning light, her hands steady on the banister. The household watched in silence, but it was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of witness. She reached the bottom. The Duke extended his hand. She took it. Together, they turned to face the household. The Duke's voice rang clear and strong. "I have asked Miss Hartnell to be my wife. She has accepted. I hope you will join me in welcoming her, not as a companion or a dependent, but as the future Duchess of Halewyn." For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Godfrey began to clap. The sound was taken up by the other servants, growing into genuine applause. Lady Catherine descended the stairs, her face radiant. She embraced Eliza, whispering, "Welcome home, my dear." The Duke kept Eliza's hand in his grip warm and sure. They walked together through the entrance hall, past the portrait of the late Duchess, whose gentle eyes seemed, in the morning light, to hold approval rather than reproach, and out into the sunlit gardens. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Eliza looked up at him. "I never thought I could be. But yes, I am happy. So am I." They walked together through the roses side by side, equals in the light of day. The house no longer held its breath. The past was honored, but it no longer governed. And the man who once could not breathe now walked freely, with the woman who had taught him that truth and love were worth any cost. Behind them, Halewyn House stood solid and enduring, its gray stone walls holding not just memory, but the promise of a future built on honesty, courage, and grace. The staircase, where everything had begun, waited in the entrance hall, no longer a place of fear or judgment, but simply a path between one life and another. And in the garden, beneath the summer sky, two people who had been invisible to the world finally saw each other clearly. It was enough. It was everything.